Week 2, Overview, the Progressive Era. This week our lessons will be framed by President Theodore Roosevelt's second term, beginning in 1905, and Howard Taft's one-term office, which ended in 1913. Grammar level students get to learn about a number of topics: the devastating earthquake that occurred in 1906 in San Francisco, the sinking of the mighty Titanic, the Panama Canal, and the reforms of Jane Addams, the first American woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Dialectic students study the Roosevelt and Taft administrations, plus a variety of events in this week's time frame, like the war between Russia and Japan, the discoveries of Albert Einstein, the theories of Sigmund Freud, and the start of Hollywood motion pictures. There's so much interesting stuff we could cover that no one can do it all. That's why we suggest that older students do mini reports on what interests them most. Most students will continue to focus on Europe, though, as they follow the events that led up to World War I. The era in Europe before World War I is often called the Age of Innocence. Americans and Europeans alike were optimistic about the future. People saw the rapid advances in science, industry, and government, and they felt like mankind stood on the cusp of solving all its problems and realizing all its dreams for the future. One meaning of the word innocent is childlike or naive. What Europeans didn't realize was how all these advances in science, industry, and government would affect the age-old art of war. In hindsight, the Europeans, with their vast buildup of arms and their assumptions that all future wars would be short and relatively bloodless, despite these powerful new weapons, were incredibly naive. From a theological perspective, it was anything but a time of innocence. It was a time of astonishing apostasy and pride. Christendom had largely turned its back on Christ. Europeans did not generally fear the one who had so recently scourged America, both North and South, for racial slavery. It was an innocence that fueled what became known as Europe's climate of hate, which led nationalistic countries to bluster and bully one another. Such trash talk led to an arms race across Europe, plus an ever more complex web of international alliances between nations. Tensions built up into a situation that could explode at any time. When it did, in 1914, it turned into the bloodiest war the planet had yet seen. We'll leave Europe to its illusions for now, to start this week's overview with Teddy Roosevelt. His first term as president began when William McKinley was shot, but Teddy didn't think reaching the presidency that way really counted. What he wanted, more than anything, was to be elected president in his own right. The Republicans unanimously nominated Teddy for re-election in 1904. He won the election with a margin of more than 2.5 million votes, more votes than any president before him. Roosevelt read voraciously, wrote several books, and was a believer in the theories of the day, social Darwinism among them. After reading The Jungle, Upton Sinclair's expose of the meatpacking industry, Roosevelt brought the power of government to bear on the issue of food. His new Food and Drug Agency made it the nation's responsibility to ensure the purity of what Americans ate and drank. Roosevelt's aggressiveness was on full display diplomatically in his second term. There were some people who accused Roosevelt of being a warmonger with his big stick policies and intense patriotism, but his big stick seemed to make peace, not break it. When Russia and Japan went to war over some contested islands in 1904, Roosevelt refused to take sides. Instead, he hosted a peace conference for the two nations in New Hampshire in 1905. Although both nations were difficult to work with, Roosevelt's patience led to a compromise being reached in the Treaty of Portsmouth. As a result of his peacemaking, Roosevelt was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace the next year, the first American to win that prize. Japan wasn't happy with the United States, however. America had acquired significant possessions in the Pacific after the Spanish-American War, but Japan didn't like America's presence in places like Guam and the Philippines. Racism was still running strong in America, and Japanese Americans were often treated badly. When the San Francisco public schools started segregating Japanese children from the rest of the students, war with Japan seemed imminent. Roosevelt wasn't looking for war, however. He pressured the San Francisco School Board to stop discriminating against Japanese children, negotiated a gentleman's agreement that got Japan to voluntarily reduce immigration, and then signed a treaty to reduce tensions overall with Japan. In 1907, Roosevelt sent a fleet of new American battleships around the world on a 2-year tour of friendship. He wanted not only to show off America's strength, but also to deliver a message of peace to those who were willing to receive it. The Great White Fleet's tour was a success, and Roosevelt was again praised for his peacemaking attempts. As we noted last week, Roosevelt had negotiated an agreement with Colombia for land across the Isthmus of Panama for a canal. The Colombians wanted more money and tried to back out of their agreement. Roosevelt lent support to rebels, who declared their independence from Colombia and formed the Republic of Panama, which promptly handed over the canal zones to American engineers. The Panama Canal was a triumph of engineering and medicine. Digging the canal was hard, but not all that hard. The hard part was staying alive in the disease-infested jungles. Yellow fever and malaria killed men faster than they could dig, and the rats carried bubonic plague. In 1904, an American Army surgeon, Colonel William Gorgas, was appointed to deal with the problem. Gorgas had contracted yellow fever himself in the 1880s, but he learned how to beat it and other mosquito-borne tropical diseases in Cuba after the Spanish-American War. Gorgas started draining the swamps and clearing the brush near the canal. His efforts worked, and as the danger of tropical diseases went down, the digging began. It was a huge project motivated by an equally huge vision. The canal motto was, "The land divided, the world united." The workers had to move 200 million cubic yards of rock and soil to construct the canal, but in 1914 the first ship sailed through. After Roosevelt's re-election in 1904, Roosevelt told the country that under no circumstances would he run for president for a third term. He chose his Secretary of War, William H. Taft, to succeed him. Taft was a bright man. He had been a very intelligent student. Second in his high school class, he graduated from Yale University in 1874 and went on to study at the University of Cincinnati Law School. He was admitted to the Ohio bar in 1880 and soon became an assistant prosecutor. After working in private law, Taft desired to become a judge. He fulfilled this ambition when he became a judge of the Ohio Superior Court in 1887. President Benjamin Harrison appointed Taft to be the U.S. Solicitor General in 1890. 2 years later, Taft was given the judgeship of the Sixth U.S. Circuit Court, where he eventually became Chief Justice. During this time, he also taught law. In 1900, President McKinley appointed Taft to be the Commissioner of the Philippines and later made him Governor General of those islands. Taft worked hard and skillfully to bring peace to the Philippines, to create a civil regime on the island, to promote the development of self-government there, although he didn't care much to work in the executive branch of the government. Taft's heart was still in the law. From 1904 to 1908, Taft served as Secretary of War for President Roosevelt. He helped establish the American Protectorate in Cuba. His legal skills and his success at governing these U.S. territories led Roosevelt to suggest him as his successor. Taft was fairly happy with the life he had, but his wife was not. She really wanted to be First Lady. So Taft accepted the nomination. Taft beat the Democratic nominee, William Jennings Bryan, a man we've seen before and will see yet again. Roosevelt packed his bags and went off to Africa on safari. The more conservative Republicans were so glad to see him go that some openly wished the Lions good luck. Unfortunately, Taft's legal skills and experience in governing conquered islands did not prepare him for the political challenges of the American presidency. He wasn't as progressive as Roosevelt or as conservative as McKinley. He tried to steer a middle course on various issues which wound up alienating everybody. When Roosevelt came back from Africa, the progressive Republicans started urging him to run again in 1912. He finally decided to break his own no third term promise and run, but not as a Republican. He formed his own progressive party, better known as the Bull Moose Party, and tried to beat both Taft and the Democratic nominee. 3 weeks before the election, Roosevelt was hit by an assassin's bullet just before a campaign appearance in Milwaukee. He wasn't killed. The bullet was slowed down by the glasses case in his pocket. Being Teddy Roosevelt, he refused to cancel his speech for a little thing like a bullet in the chest. He gave the speech anyway. Assassinations are less predictable than American politics. Roosevelt's third party split the Republican vote and handed the election to the Democrats. New York Governor Woodrow Wilson won the election of 1912. Let's turn our mind to disasters. San Francisco was the third largest city in the U.S. in 1906 when a massive earthquake hit it at 5 a.m. one day, rupturing gas mains which ignited fires that burned out of control for the next 4 days and nights. Nearly two-thirds of the city's 400,000 residents were left homeless by the quake and fire, and thousands were still in tents 2 years later. The government would not admit how many people died at the time, fearing that people back east would be afraid to move to California. Current estimates of the death toll range as high as 3,000. That's twice the number that died when the unsinkable Titanic steamed into an iceberg in 1912. The story of the Titanic is a tale that combines human hubris, deadly pride, with true heroism, men and boys who gave up their places on overcrowded lifeboats so that women and younger children could live. That wraps up this week's whirlwind tour of what happened during 2 Republican administrations. President Taft wound up becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the only person yet to head both of those 2 branches of the federal government. Teddy Roosevelt went off to explore the Amazon rainforest in 1914, and he thought about running for president again in 1920, but he died of a blood clot in his heart in 1919 at the age of 60. Who knows what might have happened if Teddy had lived?